certainly not interested in people being evicted. We're looking for every way that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Housing and Urban Development Secretary Dr. Ben Carson is here.
So what it appears to do is it allows the virus to be more contagious.
And pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson is back.
Vote by mail is a very good system if you're well organized, if you know what you're doing, and the people are well trained.
Plus, I'm joined by former Secretary of State for Washington, Sam Reed. That and so much more. Right now in America This Week, United We Stand. Welcome to America This Week, United We Stand. I'm Eric Bolling. In the week following America's 244th birthday, protesters continue to tear down monuments of our founding fathers. The nation experienced a surge in violence while calls to defund the police grow louder. Plus, as states continue to open up, coronavirus cases are on the rise, showing little sign of stopping. In addition to all of this, eviction moratoriums are set to expire later this month, potentially creating a housing crisis. Joining me now to discuss this is Housing and Urban Development Secretary Dr. Ben Carson. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Carson. So these eviction moratoriums are supposed to expire later on this month, July 25th, I believe. You've come out with an eviction prevention toolkit. Explain that to us, please.
Well, basically, we want both people who are tenants and landlords and owners to know all the things that are available to prevent eviction. And we want to encourage them to start talking, if it comes to that, early rather than at the last minute, so that you can avail yourself of the various things that are available.
What are the various things that are or will be available, you think, Doc?
Exactly. And people need to recognize that, the government's certainly not interested in people being evicted. We're looking for every way that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that includes, obviously, working with all divisions of the government to get things opened back up in a responsible way so that people can actually go back to work and open the economy.
So take us through the steps. So I'm looks like I'm not going to be able to afford my rent. We've put off the eviction until July 25th because of the policy. It expires. What's the dialogue I'm supposed to have? Let's do it from both sides. Let's take it from the person who is at risk of being evicted. But I also want to ask you, what about the other side? What about the landlord side? So let's start with the evictee.
Well, either one should go to HUD.gov/coronavirus, where you can access a lot of information. But the person who is about to be evicted obviously is the one who has the most on the line, and therefore needs to understand the whole concept of forbearance and understand what their rights are. If you're in a HUD facility, your eviction moratorium expires later than somebody who is not in a HUD-owned multifamily. And maybe some people don't know that. So this really kind of lays all of that out, but also provides you with information that you can give to your landlord or to the owner, because sometimes they're not aware of the forbearance that's extended to them and the fact that they, as a small business, are eligible for some PPP benefit.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the other things that are bubbling up right now. COVID-19 cases continue to rise. Deaths are down, though. Doc, what do you see? You're a neurologist. You're a well-trained doctor. What are you seeing out there?
Well, it's very encouraging, in fact, that the death rate has gone down so much. One death is a lot, particularly if it's you. But the fact of the matter is, we're in the 300 or 400 range a day now versus 2,500 range a couple of months ago. So that means we've learned a lot about how to deal with this. It also means that many of the people who are being infected are young people. And, even though we talk about these vastly increased numbers, you never hear anybody talking about which ones are symptomatic and which ones are not. The fact of the matter is, a lot of them are asymptomatic. And obviously, if you go out into a population and you start testing a lot of people, and many of them are asymptomatic, your numbers are going to increase quite dramatically. And we're seeing a combination of that and the fact that I think a lot of young people are not really taking this seriously in terms of the mechanisms of spreading of disease. So, they're not socially distancing, they're not washing their hands, they're not wearing masks, and they're thinking that they're pretty invulnerable anyway. The fact of the matter is they are.
Yeah.
They're not likely to die from it, but they can pass it on to someone else. And I always suggest to people, just assume that you're an asymptomatic carrier when you're around elderly people and susceptible people. Just make that assumption and act in that.
Yeah, it's hard to keep young people down for this amount of time, especially when, as you point out, it's almost unlikely for them to die from a case. They'll get a flu, they'll get some symptoms, they'll move on, and that's really why we see these big parties going on in various pools and lakes around the country. Doc, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this with what's going on with our statues and with the racial tensions in America. Do you believe there is systemic racism in America?
I believe there was a time when there used to be systemic racism. I certainly grew up during such a time. America has changed dramatically since that time, and I don't think that it exists now. There is racism, but there's a difference between systemic racism and racism. And
can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about just the existence of racism, that's individuals that populate all over the place. If you're talking systemic, you mean that it's throughout the fabric of everything we do, which means we need to be changed. And it provides a mechanism for those who want to fundamentally change America to say, you see, it's a totally broken system and therefore we need to replace it. And that simply is not what's going on. I think there are a lot of people who are utilizing race and racism as an excuse to push their ideology upon the rest of society. And it's a double-edged sword because they can also make a lot of people feel guilty. And guilty people frequently do things that don't make a lot of sense. So this is what we're seeing right now. People taking down statues, renaming universities. I mean, where does that stop? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to try to obliterate your history. But here's what you must remember. If you want to fundamentally change a society, first you have to obliterate your history, because your history is what gives you your identity. And if you don't have an identity, then you don't stand for something. And if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And that's basically what we see happening in our society today.
Yeah, and there was a Spanish-American philosopher who said those who do not know history are going to doom themselves to repeating it. We're going to say thank you to Dr. Ben Carson for your time. Again, HUD Secretary, neurosurgeon, all around just great guy. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Eric.
Ahead on America This Week United We Stand, experts warn of a mutation in the COVID-19 virus, why the change may make you want to wear a mask. Plus, as coronavirus cases continue to rise, leaders are looking for ways to control it. The problems we're already seeing with one solution. Next.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand, America.
United we stand.
We stand, America.
United we stand.
Scientists discover new mutations about how COVID-19 gets into the body. WKRC's medical reporter Liz Bonus explains why it may make you want to wear a mask around others.
You hear that? It's the sound of giving back.
I love being a part of this. It's a blessing.
Every week, this group of women meet inside Calvary Baptist Church in northern Kentucky. They call themselves Needle and Thread.
We've had all this material donated. All of our people donate their times. Our sewing machines are donated. What a blessing. Just you can't even describe the outreach that this group has had already. And we've made over 3,000 masks.
And perhaps never has there been a time where something like this is more important as we continue to try to stop the spread of this virus. There is new research today that the virus is changing. Scientists in the journal Cell say it is caused by gene mutation. The genetic sequence of the spike protein on the surface of the COVID-19 coronavirus is what the virus uses to attach to a cell and get into the body. It appears to be changing, so the virus is easier to spread, but apparently less deadly. Dr. Stephen Blatt points out, however,
it's still a bad virus for the elderly patients with lots of medical problems.
while this virus change isn't likely to impact treatment, Dr. Blatt says it does give more support to wearing a mask when you can't be socially distant from others not in your regular circle.
I love that that's my share to the community, and this is what I am doing in this kind of pandemic, so helping whatever way I can help.
You might say the real faces we should all see behind the masks. For America This Week, I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus.
Thank you, Liz and WKRC for that story. Joining me now is pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson. Thank you, doctor, for coming back and joining us, especially on this new news week. What's this about a mutation?
Well, there does appear to be a mutation in the virus. This is something that was reported originally from China quite early in the outbreak in the pandemic. And the mutation is in the spike protein. This is the surface protein that kind of coats the surface of the virus. And what it appears to do is it allows the virus to be more contagious, to enter cells more easily. That's the bad news. Now, the kind of the silver lining, if there is one here, is it doesn't appear to make the virus more deadly or cause more severe illness. And it doesn't appear to potentially affect immunity or a vaccine. But it does appear to allow this virus, sadly, to spread more easily.
I think I ask you this every week, Dr. Dena. Do we know for sure, one way or the other, whether an infected person, someone who has the antibody, can get reinfected, even with maybe with this mutation?
We don't know that for certain, Eric, but it's highly, highly likely that if you have antibodies to the virus, you are likely immune to getting sick from the virus. You could get, just like with the flu or any other virus, you could be quote unquote infected, but you would clear the virus very, very quickly. So it does appear that convalescent plasma also would be effective against this mutated virus as well.
All right, Dr. Dena, as if 2020 hasn't been bad enough, bubonic plague, really?
I had the exact same reaction, Eric, when I read this news. I'm like, what is going on here in 2020? Yes, unfortunately, there was a case in China of the bubonic plague. Now, this is not a virus. That's the good news here. This is something transmitted by infected fleas on rodents. It does happen from time to time. The plague is still around. It's spread by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. That's not something where I think we here in the United States really should be overly worried. It's not something that can be readily spread through the air like coronavirus, but it is one of those, you roll your eyes and go, my goodness, what else is going to happen this year?
Yeah, and one of the things I think has become a very hot topic, President Trump has weighed in on it, and others have pushed back on President Trump, reopening schools. What do you say, Doc? Bad idea, good idea? What do you think?
Well, we have 5 kids, and believe me, we would really like our kids to be back in school. However, unfortunately, right now in the United States, we're averaging over 50,000 new cases every day. So we are a hot zone, and we're seeing just this continued rise in the number of cases. So I think this really, we talked about this last week on the show, Eric. I really think this has to be not just school district by district, but actually school by school. And if there's an area of the country where there aren't a lot of cases, you could potentially think about reopening sort of voluntary for those people that want or need to send their kids back to a physical school with them wearing masks and trying to be as physically apart as possible. But otherwise, given the situation for the most of the country right now, I think it's a very dangerous proposition.
You know, in normal circumstances, you know, this whole issue of foreign students coming over to the United States, coming to our school, I'd be concerned, but I think we're more infected than any other country in the world, so maybe that's not an issue. Should we worry about students coming from other countries and bringing infection back to the U.S.?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Eric. I think with the, you know, some rare exceptions like maybe Brazil, I mean, we are really the hottest zone in the world right now. And remember, it's summer. Things are likely going to get much, much worse in the fall and winter as we approach the school year. So if I were a parent overseas, I would be nervous about sending my child here to go to school. It's a much more dangerous, unfortunately, than much of the world.
Just about a half a minute or so. Again, I'll ask you again. What about this idea of let's just get this virus through the population and get it over, the herd immunity, so to speak? When we were kids, you say eat some dirt because you'll grow immune to some of the bacteria. Isn't it? Don't we need to get infected and get it over with? 30 seconds.
Well, if we do that, I think what we're going to see is a very sharp spike in hospitalizations like we saw in New York City. Hospital systems got overwhelmed, people died at home, and the mortality rate will skyrocket. I think that's a near certainty, unfortunately.
All right, Dr. Dena Grayson, we're going to have one of these weeks where we get some really good news. I can't wait for that week. We come back to the pandemic expert. Dr. Dena, appreciate your time. Thank you. State leaders continue to look for ways to contain the virus. Josie Sturman from Sinclair's Spotlight in America team explores apps designed to help track people exposed to infected patients and why they may not be the solution.
As states across the country opened up this spring, leaders from coast to coast echoed a call for one thing they considered essential to battle coronavirus: contact tracing.
It will require, under any estimate, a tracing army.
An army that could be helped by technology. States including Virginia, South Carolina, and Alabama have said they're working on apps for contact tracing, while South Dakota, North Dakota, and Utah have already started using them. But online reviews uncovered by Spotlight on America showed inaccuracies, problems, and even privacy concerns shortly after rollout.
Well, they're not safe enough to be making decisions for public good.
Ashkan Soltani is a former senior tech advisor to the White House and Federal Trade Commission. He has major concerns about the effectiveness and reliability of untested apps.
If we're simply just using it to gauge as a mood ring where the state of infection might be, that's one thing. If we're actually using it to make policy decisions, those are much more significant.
Significant to Soltani are problems with apps that could provide inaccurate information, telling you you've had contact with someone who was positive when you didn't, or that you're safe when you aren't. Also, he cites privacy concerns with apps that involve massive data gathering, logging all your movements, as well as the potential for bad actors to hack the systems.
There needs to be protections and policies in place before we have widespread adoption of these apps.
I'm Josie Sturman for Spotlight on America.
Thank you, Josie, for that story. Coming up on America This Week United We Stand, the controversy surrounding mail-in ballots, why one conservative politician says they work. But first, last week, you were very animated. The toll-free number lit up all weekend long. We received several hundred calls. Overwhelmingly, many of you were really upset about the statues coming down. Now, I listened to each and every call, and the call is 100% toll-free. 888-601-0032. I wanted you to hear comments from all sides. Here are just a few.
And I'm sick of these people, these representatives that would not stop these people from breaking down the statue. And I'm a foreigner. I love America, and it's getting on my nerves that these people are not saying one word. These Democrats not saying one word. And sadly, for 50-odd years, I followed the Democratic Party.
Yeah, here's a piece of my mind. When it comes to defacing statues, shootings and riots and protests in 2020, all it is a 100-year setback, because history will repeat itself.
I'd like to order a large pepperoni pizza. Thank you.
That's fine, but pepperoni, extra cheese, that's extra too. Here's that number again, 888-601-0032. As you can see, you really can say anything. You can also go to ericbolling.com or follow me on Twitter at Eric Bolling. I'll keep making sure they hear you too.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand American
United we stand.
We stand American strong.
City by city, state by state, town by town, stand American great. Everyone stands American strong. When strength by one equals strength by all.
American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand American
United we stand.
We stand American
United we stand.
America This Week, America's fastest growing political show, points out how rough and tumble politics shape opinion in every region in our country. We tell American stories, stories that touch our people, determine our politics, focus on the future of America.
I'm Eric Bolling. Join me for a fascinating look at America this week. Many states are looking at allowing voters to mail in ballots, and some have already ramped up their efforts during primaries. Joining me now is former Secretary of State for Washington, Sam Reed. Secretary, thank you very much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about some of the perils of mail-in voting, specifically fraud. We've seen all the stories about boxes and boxes of ballots left in mailrooms or even in trash bins. Tell us about the fraud that could happen.
Well, if they are well organized and if they know what they're doing, that will not happen. Because actually vote by mail is a very good system if you're well organized, if you know what you're doing, and the people are well trained. We really haven't had any problems of fraud here in the state of Washington.
But there are instances of some fraud taking place. We all know the stories of certain amount of people who may have been registered who've passed away, and there's still somehow their ballot gets into the process. Is that mail-in voting? Let's do it this. Let me ask you this. Tell me the difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting.
Mail voting is when the elections office mails out ballots to everybody in the jurisdiction that they're eligible to vote in. Absentee ballots, they have to actually apply for the ballot, and then the elections administrators mail it to them.
So do you not see the opportunity for fraud with mail-in voting when there are so many things that have to go right to basically get everyone a ballot if they want to mail their ballot in?
Well, what we have done in the state of Washington, and I think in Oregon and some of the others as well, is we've set up a system. For example, you mentioned deaths. Well, we set up a system with the Social Security Administration to get their master death index with our state health department and such. So we really have up-to-date information on people who have died. And in terms of moving, we also have a working relationship with the post office, but also we're part of a system that connects in with a number of databases, which establishes establishes addresses.
Is there a savings for mail-in voting? In other words, you need fewer voting places, you need fewer voting election officials. Is it cheaper for mail-in voting?
Well, it really depends upon how well you're organized and what your system is. But in fact, I found there was a significant savings. So that is one of the arguments for it. But the one that I, as a Republican, really cared about was it allowed for a more informed electorate. Rather than walking the polling site and seeing candidates down the ballot they never heard of or issues, they have time to look at it, to read up, to look at websites, and in our state, look at voters' pamphlets to cast a more informed ballot.
Sam, I only have about a half a minute or so. Give us your former Secretary of State for the state of Washington. Talk to the other secretaries of state around the country. What do they need to look out for if they choose to go that way?
They need to realize you can't turn on a dime. You have to be really well organized. I urge them to contact states of Washington and Oregon and find out how you need to set up your system. You need to have more space. You need to have better trained election administrators. And in our case, we use the State Patrol to train them on how to look for a valid signature.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Former Secretary of State, State of Washington, Sam Reed, thank you for your time. You don't want to miss an episode of America This Week or United We Stand? Be sure to set your DVR so you can catch every one of our interviews. To find out when we air in your city, check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/America Bowling, all one word.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand America.
United we stand.
We stand America.
United we stand. United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand America.
United we stand.
We stand America.
United we stand.
And that's a wrap from the D.C. Swamp. Thank you for joining me for another fantastic episode of America This Week, United We Stand. Tonight, we leave you with the images of celebrating our nation's 244th birthday. The U.S. Army Thunderbirds flying over the White House as part of the president's salute to America. See you next week, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and turn your attention to the White House.